Donald Trump's return to office was supposed to herald in a golden era for US-Saudi relations. Trump had been an outspoken critic of Biden's Saudi policy, which aspired to relegate the kingdom to an international pariah, and clearly has a bit of a bromance with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, commonly known as MBS. However, while the optics are still good, at a freewheeling speech in Riyadh a couple of months ago, for instance, Trump said he liked MBS, quote, too much. In the past couple of weeks, there have been a number of signs suggesting the kingdom is quietly distancing itself from the US. So in this video, we're going to look at this apparent downturn in US-Saudi relations, and whether the relationship can recover. Dive deeper into politics with our magazine Too Long. Yes, we made a real physical magazine. In the latest issue, we discuss how El Salvador and Kosovo became 21st century penal colonies. We ask 6 experts what drives anti-establishment sentiment around the world, and ask if we're observing the end of the American order. Find out more by clicking the link in the description. So let's get straight into it. As we see it, there are at least 3 things that suggest Saudi Arabia is distancing itself from the US. The first is OPEC Plus's continued production hikes. For context, OPEC, or the Organisation of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, is an international cartel of oil exporting countries that cooperate on oil production to control, or at least influence, the global price of oil. It's always been led by the Saudis, who are one of the world's biggest oil producers and the world's only real so-called swing producer. That is, the only producer that can easily adjust production enough to move global prices in the immediate term. OPEC became OPEC Plus in 2016, when it was expanded to include Russia, largely in response to America's rise as an oil producer, which had undermined OPEC's ability to control oil prices. Saudi Arabia and Russia realised they'd have more control over global prices if they cooperated, hence OPEC Plus. Anyway, until recently, OPEC Plus was essentially restricting output in an attempt to push up global oil prices, with the Saudis explicitly committing to a $100 per barrel price target. This didn't really work. Despite consecutive cuts, oil stuck stubbornly around the $80 mark throughout 2023 and 2024. This was in part because of American shale producers, who pumped more oil when prices were high, offsetting OPEC Plus's cuts. However, in the past year or so, OPEC Plus have changed their strategy. Instead of pushing for higher prices by cutting production, OPEC Plus has started going for greater market share by increasing production. Pumping more oil obviously naturally increases OPEC Plus's market share, but it's now become clear that OPEC Plus, and especially the Saudis, are also trying to use lower prices to bankrupt American shale producers, by pushing prices so low that it's no longer profitable for them to pump. For context, the Saudis enjoy far lower production costs than their American counterparts. Estimates vary, but most analysts generally think prices have to be at about $60 a barrel for American shale producers to make a profit, compared to more like $20 for the Saudis. OPEC Plus's recent production hikes have already pushed prices down from about $80 a barrel a year ago to more like $65 today. And the fact that the cartel agreed to yet another production hike at this month's meeting, despite the fact that most analysts expect a tariff-induced economic slowdown to lead to lower demand next year, suggests they're trying to get prices so low that American shale producers go bankrupt. Now, when OPEC Plus last tried this gambit back in the late 2010s, it didn't really work, and the US oil industry has gone from strength to strength since. However, this was in large part because interest rates were so low that US shale producers could just borrow their way out of trouble. That's no longer the case, which means the Saudis might have more luck this time round. Anyway, this all puts the Saudis at odds with Trump, who's an enthusiastic supporter of the US oil industry, hence his drill baby drill campaign slogan. The Saudis have gotten away with it so far because Trump knows that voters generally appreciate lower oil prices. But we're now hitting crunch point. Prices have been low enough for long enough that American shale producers are starting to feel the heat. And there have been a slew of reports suggesting US producers are tightening their belts, with the Energy Information Administration now predicting a drop in American output next year. In this sense, the Saudis are exploiting a long-running tension in Trump's oil policy. He needs lower prices to keep the electorate happy, but higher oil prices to keep American producers happy. Anyway, the second thing that suggests the Saudis are distancing themselves from the US is the recent Saudi-Pakistan security pact that, at least according to statements by the Pakistani defense minister, involves Pakistan expanding its nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia. While Saudi officials have been keen to stress that the pact was a long time coming, it's hard not to see the pact as at least partly motivated by Saudi anxieties about the reliability of the US as Saudi Arabia's primary security guarantor. The pact was signed only a couple of days after Israel launched missile strikes inside Qatar, which Arab states interpreted as proof that a functional relationship with the US wouldn't be enough to guard against Israeli aggression. Moreover, Saudi Arabia has been pushing for a NATO-esque security pact with the US for a couple of years now, but to no avail, much to the kingdom's frustration. This is in part because the US was holding out on any Article 5-style security guarantee as leverage to get the Saudis to normalise relations with Israel, but also because successive US administrations, since at least Obama, have been trying to extricate the US from the Middle East, and a NATO-esque pact with Saudi Arabia would obviously risk dragging them back in. The new pact with Pakistan suggests the Saudis have come to accept the US wants to get out of the region, and still gives them a nuclear umbrella while allowing MBS to avoid the politically difficult process of normalising relations with Israel. Anyway, the third thing that suggests the Saudis are distancing themselves from the US is the recent rapprochement with Iran. Saudi-Iran relations have been stabilising for a few years now. Most obviously, there was that China-mediated normalisation agreement back in 2023. But the rapprochement has accelerated in recent months, presumably motivated by mutual anxieties about Israel. MBS and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian met in Qatar last month, where Pezeshkian apparently suggested a quote Islamic alliance to deter Israel, and a day later the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council travelled to Riyadh. Of course, this is all happening while US-Iran relations are in the gutter, largely as a consequence of America's airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. That the Saudis are pursuing a rapprochement with Iran at the same time suggests that the Saudis are less willing to follow America's strategic lead than they once were, and is yet further evidence of the strain that Israel's bellicose regional posture is putting on the long-standing US-Saudi relationship. Perhaps the ceasefire in Gaza will relieve some pressure, but it's worth noting that the structural forces that originally undergirded the US-Saudi relationship, America wanted Saudi oil and the Saudis wanted American protection, no longer hold. You know as well as us that in this current climate, it's important to stay sharp, and perhaps even more important to be precise. Well, our sponsor this week, Henson Shaving, knows this better than anyone and take pride in their precision. That's because their razor perfectly holds the blade at a 30-degree angle and extends it only 0.0013 inches, less than the width of a human hair, which means incredibly tight tolerances, very high standards, and superb precision. This also results in a much healthier shave compared to the overpriced plastic razor cartridges that leave your skin feeling sore and mistreated. Speaking of plastic, you probably don't realise, but over 2 billion plastic razors are thrown into landfill each year in the US alone. So not only are they wildly expensive, but they're also terrible for the environment. The same can't be said for Henson, as their razors are completely plastic-free. From the blade to the box, everything Henson ships out to you is entirely recyclable. Henson strives to protect your skin in a way that's accessible, affordable, and kind to the environment. And while it might sound intimidating changing the blade yourself, it's actually remarkably easy to do so, and even kind of satisfying taking full control of your shave. If you've been meaning to try out Henson, there's no better time to start than right now, as we're offering you 100 free blades with your purchase when you use code TLDR at checkout. Just go to hensonshaving.com/TLDR or click the link in the description and you'll be on your way to a healthier shave.